Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Buzzer Race. I'm your host, Nikhil Ranjan, and for today we have Jennie Luongo, current NJCL Certamen Chair and Latin teacher at St. Andrew's Episcopal in Austin, Texas. Welcome, Jennie.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. We're really excited to have you. So I want to just kind of throw us into things and talk about first, you're a really big figure on the scene. You've been the chair for quite a while now. But how did things get started for you? I know you didn't go to a Nats as a student. So how did you end up getting so involved in the NJCL scene?
Well, it's funny to hear you say that I'm really big in the NJCL scene. I don't think of myself that way. But so I was never able to go to nationals as a student. My teacher in my school didn't really take people. My senior year, I was the treasurer for the Texas State Junior Classical League, which would have paid for me to go to nationals. And it was actually in Texas that summer. And I try not to have too many regrets in life. And certainly at the time had no idea that this would be a regret, but I regret not being able to go to that. But at that time I spent most summers with my grandparents in Virginia. And so it just didn't work out and I didn't prioritize it. Now I totally would have, of course, because I've been going every year for well over 20 years. But at any rate, I started teaching at this crazy little school in Austin, Texas. And in my first few years there, I was thinking of it as a place that I would stay a few years and then move to a high school program. I knew I wanted to teach high school. That had been my goal for a really long time. But in my first couple of years at the school, they started talking about building a high school. And I was still interviewing at different programs and still thinking about maybe moving to a different high school program. But the more I got kind of put on committees and given the opportunity to dream up what a new high school would look like and what a high school curriculum could look like, I realized that opportunity to build a new school wasn't going to come along many times in my life, and that it made sense to stay put for a bit and be patient. So I taught elementary and middle school Latin for 6 years as the high school was being developed and built. And then I became the first high school Latin teacher at St. Andrews. And it's just been a good place for me to stay, but that's a separate story. We're talking about nationals. So one of the things that we use, it's hard to get kids to go to a brand new high school that's going to be a small place, that's not going to have a whole lot of kids, especially if they've had in their mind that they were going to go to Austin High or another big public school. And so one of the things that I used to kind of bribe my kids during that time is I said, okay, well, if you come to the high school, we're going to go to nationals. And we're going to go every summer. And it's just going to be a thing. And I made a little poster for my room. I had never been, keep all of this in mind. I made a little poster for my room that had like the next 4 locations for nationals. And the first one we could go to was in Florida. So I would talk about the beach and, all these things that I was just making up that we were going to do. But it worked. We, lured kids to this high school that had no track record. And I took my first group to Florida for that NJCL. And I've been going ever since. I loved it. The kids loved it. It was great. And I guess I could have predicted that it was going to be great. Obviously, I'd been selling it as, one of the things they were going to get to do in high school Latin. So yeah, that's initially how I got going, was as a teacher who just wanted my kids to be excited about coming to the school that we were starting, but also excited about taking Latin at this new school.
Yeah. And that's a really wholesome way to view nationals, right? Because the nationals does to a degree kind of get viewed a little hyper competitively. So I appreciate more of just the event to go see and experience, because I feel like it's always once someone stops competing is the takeaway they have about nationals. It's no longer really the oh, I got to compete against all these people. It's oh, it's really fun. I met so many people. So I'm really glad that's how it was branded. And I want to ask, since, you were having to kind of advertise an event you've never been to, how was the transition of like a local scene in Austin and like whatever that may have been at the time to moving up to nationals and kind of like creating that bridge? Like, how did you go about doing that?
Sure. Well, so I would say that, the first group I was taking to nationals, they weren't competing in competitive Kurtamen or anything like that. That definitely came along later for my group of kids. But we already, before the high school was even started, we're hosting a local Kurtamen. We're about to host, I think it's our 33rd annual. Yeah, I know. Let's just, not talk about
Not
that.
do the math.
Yeah, exactly. Don't think about that too much. But anyway, we were already hosting a local Kurtamen. And I had kids who loved playing Kurtamen, but and were pretty consistently successful in the Austin area. But I'd never. It's complicated because Austin is one of the few places that has a separate level for middle schoolers who take Latin over multiple years. And it's rare in the state of Texas. I know there are other places that have accommodations for those kids. So at that time in Austin, I was coaching really successful middle school Latin teams, but they weren't the kids who ever went to represent the Austin area at the state convention, because the state convention didn't have a middle school level. So it was our high school novice teams that would go compete at the state convention. That's not true anymore. Now we combine, and the middle school and novice teams go to compete at the state convention. So at that time, I was coaching these like really successful middle school teams that won area every year, won Austin every year, and that was it. And they were like middle school champions like 10 years in a row or something. But that was like, the pinnacle for them. So once I started coaching kids at the high school level, they were eligible to go to the Texas State Convention. But it was, 4 or 5 years in before I had kids who were successful enough at the state convention that they were able to compete at the national level. And in Texas, luckily, things have changed. I think things are a little more collaborative now, and we bring kids in from all over the state, and all sorts of different technologies are available now that weren't available then to facilitate that, which is wonderful. So I'm really happy about that. But yeah, because we had never won a state championship, we weren't eligible to compete at nationals. And now, like I said, that's not necessarily a requirement because kids get brought in from all over the state, but that's how it was back then.
Yeah, I was like, that was a thing in area B kind of. Well, it was like the thing where like whoever wins could choose what to do. And my first few years, I was like, I'm never gonna get to play because we're getting like bodied at area. But then luckily Mr. Lee was very willing to be like, yeah, if you're from another school, you can still compete. So I'm glad to see it's happened on a state level too now, because it brings kids all over and together, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy about how the Kurtamen environment has shifted in Texas in the time that I've been. Well, I was a student in Texas, and at the time I've been teaching in Texas, which, as I just mentioned, is a very short time. So, only 30 some years.
Only 30 something. So I really want to talk about this because I want to hear about it before we move on to really just talking about NJCL and kind of shifting away from the local scene. So you were formerly part of Area C, which for non-Texas people is Dallas. And so I was curious, what was that scene like at the time? Because I don't really get to know too much about like any scene beyond San Antonio and Austin and vaguely Houston at this point. So I'm curious, like what Dallas was like.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're dredging through like the depths of my memory. So, we'll see how much I really remember. But it felt pretty separate from what was going on in San Antonio and Austin, and I think that was partly the time. Now kids just have so many different ways to communicate that we didn't have. I mean, when I was a Texas State JCL officer, we got reimbursed for long distance bills, if you can imagine, because we had to, use a phone that was attached to the wall and pay to call someone in San Antonio. So it was just a different time, but it felt like it was more insulated and isolated from other parts of Texas, but that also meant that it was, a pretty vibrant place where especially the kids who were playing Kurtamen really got to know teachers from other schools and see people regularly at Kurtamena and that kind of thing. And so my teacher, Margaret Oots, was obviously a huge, she just made a huge impact in my life. But also teachers in Dallas like Patty Rollins and Donna Gerard also were people who felt present on a regular basis. And so I'd say it was a fairly tight-knit community that was unlike today where there's all sorts of ways to communicate outside of convention. It was pretty centered around Kurtamena and convention. And we had a good number of people who came to Area C back in the day. I went to Duncanville, which I think people in Texas now know as more of like a sports or band powerhouse, but we also held our own in Latin and did really well at Area C convention. So it was a fun time to be competing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's awesome to hear about stuff like this because I think it's always like nothing to throw shade at like the national level community, but it's really cool to hear about what the local scenes are like and what the experience is like there. Because I mean, they're kind of the most important people at the end of the day for Latin, right? And like kind of like the preservation and enjoyment of it for students.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
So now we're going to run away from these very important people and talk about big NJCL stuff. Because you are the chair. You were the chair for the past 4 years. You just got reelected as of this last convention, unless I completely misunderstood how politics
No, you're
work.
right.
So when you came into your first time as chair and the campaign you're running on, it did center around a lot around like diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it be in the questions, just the competitive environment. And I mean, just you haven't done it only in Kurtamen, to be clear, but that was at least the focus as like a chair, right, of Kurtamen. This is kind of what you'd be doing. So I'm curious of like what you think over these past 4 years has come out of it that you're like, this is really what we wanted to achieve. And maybe, future looking for these next 4 also are like things we still need to try getting done.
Oh gosh, there's always so much work to get done. So I will say that I think I still would have run if I knew what was going to happen in the last 4 years, but I'm not positive. So, pretty quickly after I was elected, things kind of got very much sidetracked by a pandemic and by the fact that the gentleman who'd been making Quiz Wizard 2 machines for ages were no longer going to make them. And so, those have been kind of 2 big things that I've spent a lot of time focusing on that I never anticipated having to focus on. I am really proud that everyone in the Kurtamen community pulled together and that we managed to keep Kurtamen going during the pandemic. That was, I think, stressful for everybody. A lot of work on the part of a lot of different people. And so I'm proud of the part I had in making sure that the kids who were competing and excited in the spring of 2020 were still able to compete in some way, shape, or form, and that we were able to keep going through 2 virtual conventions. And wow, did it feel good to be back in person this year. And to be, to see kids holding Certamen buzzers in their hands again and all of that stuff. So in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the things that kind of went along with that is, I think we saw the ability for lots and lots of people from all over the country who normally wouldn't get to necessarily compete and travel at college Certamen, at NJCL, be able to join in and participate. And I think, last summer, some of those kids were able to join us in person as well. I still think that that's something that we opened up and we want to continue to foster so that we can make sure that people who can't travel for whatever reason can still find an outlet in Certamen. And I've been working with some kids in China who want to start Certamen there. Yeah. And, I'm not sure that without the experience during the pandemic, I would be able to really help them because they're still not really able to meet in person. So I've got lots of advice for them because of what we went through here. So that's exciting. And I'm really pleased about that. Also, pre-pandemic, we got some conversations started with various groups in JCL and beyond about how we can write questions that are not only more equitable, but that keep in mind all sorts of things about ableism and racism and sexism and, on and on and on, and don't sanitize the rape that happens in classical mythology and all of those things. So I'm still really proud and really excited of the work that continues to happen with the question writing guide that we've created to kind of help people think about those types of things. Sometimes I cringe now when I read questions from 20 years ago, which I'm sure I read without thinking twice 20 years ago, but now I read it and I'm like, oh, we can do this better. So yeah, I'm really happy about all of that work. But I did feel like things got derailed a bit, but all of that was important stuff to happen. I think you also asked me about moving forward with that.
Yeah, so because obviously it's very clear that DI is never a one and done thing. So it's like kind of like, how do you look forward about still continuing to implement what y'all have already chosen and done and worked with, but how do you want to keep moving forward with it?
Yeah, so I think that as we move forward, there's kind of an emergency in making sure that Latin programs in the US are sustainable. So a conversation started at the beginning of my tenure before the pandemic about kind of ways to maybe rethink syllabi and question distribution and that kind of thing. And as we were talking about it last summer to finally, produce what I had hoped was going to be presented to people, 2-3 years ago, we decided to focus on things like material culture questions and scientific terminology and things that hopefully can connect or can make clearer the connection between Latin and things that are funded really well right now, like STEM programs.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of become the focus of that. I think there's still a lot of room for us to think about what other categories we want to include, should be included. I'd love for us to move away from history as kind of a study of great men and move towards a study of the people who made up most of the population that was living at the time. And, looking for sources that can highlight that, I think would be great. I'd also like to see us include, more history and religious beliefs of broader cultures. I know there's been a suggestion that we add some Egyptian mythology, and I love that idea. I'm not opposed to it at all. Somebody else has come to me and asked if we could add a source book about Black classicists in particular, who have been important, members of the American classics community, but who often get forgotten or looked over. And so my hope is that we can find ways to slowly but surely diversify what our students are looking at and thinking about. This is maybe saying it on podcasts will push us to make it happen. I'm hopeful, for instance, we might get a speaker about Black classicists at NJCL this summer, and maybe just do like an exhibition curtailment round for kids who want to participate after learning about the Black classicists who have been particularly important in terms of scholarship in the United States. So, all of those things are things that I'm really excited about, but I also want to keep in mind that we ask kids to learn a lot.
Yeah.
And so what are the limits of kind of how much we're going to expect kids to know about the ancient Mediterranean? Because there's a lot of exciting stuff out there.
Yeah, there is a lot. And I mean, those are all like really fascinating ideas. And also, I mean, I hope to see a lot of them because they sound really cool. And I guess I'll have to focus on STEAM because this is what came up just at the end of Nats. So for STEAM, for people who don't know, is a like somewhat new version of a syllabus where more like there are different ideas of different categories. Whether maybe we increase question counts in certain categories, we introduce things like starting to ask scientific terminology, as you mentioned, perhaps more material culture related things. So we aren't so focused on like, what's a confarreatio, but, can we talk about something more like, maybe something left in like a Pompeian house, and can we talk about that and show it to kids and have them, be tested on it. So there's a lot of variety for what things will be tested with STEAM. And there are a lot of plans. I remember the document had like, I don't know how many letters it goes through, let alone numbers, but there are a fair amount of kind of like bits and pieces that are going on. And I don't know if you can say this or if there is sort of this type of thing, but is there a certain lean towards a plan already? I know upcoming, probably by the time this is released, I'm not sure when we want to do it, but probably by the time this is released, the meeting at least with the coaches may have already happened. I think it should be released before the students have met with y'all on a forum, but is there already like a lean towards a certain sub plan? Because I mean, this has been discussed, as you mentioned, for multiple years now. So I'm curious if you can talk about that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that. I think as much as we can, it's important to be transparent as we think about making changes in anything, because they're just there are a lot of people who care about these things. There are a lot of stakeholders involved, and I don't want anybody to feel like there's like some backdoor deal going on, where the history people are going to get, what they want, and other people aren't going to get what they want. So I'll say that I think there are 5 different plans, and I'm Switzerland in all of this. I really don't have a strong opinion about the direction that we go in. But it was important to me as chair that we presented lots of different options. And it's easy, when you talk to, I'll pick on the history people again, just because I already did. When you talk to people who are passionate about history, they have things that like they've always wanted to change about, the question distribution and, can't we fix this thing? And then of course, you talk to another group, language people or whatever, and they have opinions about things that need to be shifted and that kind of thing. So it was important to me that we presented enough different plans that everyone felt like something maybe about the ideas that are being discussed in the curtailment community are reflected. somewhere in one of those 5 different plans. And I'm happy to go with any of them. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't want to present a plan that I, in some way, or a group of us in some way had already decided is a no-go. We're not doing that one. We're not doing plan 5, but let's tease them with it. So yeah, they're all totally viable to me. And we're having these, fora, town hall meetings, whatever you want to call them, because it's important, I think, to hear as many voices as possible. You mentioned the local scene, like all of us have our group of people that we kind of, talk to, lean on. And that's great because, goodness knows we need the support, especially those of us who have anything to do with education these days. But yeah, it's important that we have a broad conversation about where Certamen's headed. And I also want to let people know that I've definitely heard that people would like the changes to start with novice and move up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to make any changes to intermediate or advanced for like this coming summer or anything. If we do shift the questions in any way, we're going to be shifting on the novice level.
Yeah, and then like naturally progress.
Yeah, exactly. So kids don't feel like there was like a bait and switch and they lost a question or something. Yeah.
So you mentioned this earlier about trying to connect to maybe, more funded things like STEM and stuff like that. So when it comes to introducing these, I want to be clear because I think there's a big misunderstanding with STEAM that it's really that much of a shift from the current Certamen set. It's really just like being willing to ask more that we already have that we just haven't. It's like when life asks the same 3 things for 10 tournaments in a row, and like, there's a lot more at hand. So just to be clear, it's really more like being more willing to ask other things rather than the stock stuff. When it has that connection, is STEAM, like, I guess I'm kind of curious, like what's like the hope for STEAM to achieve by being implemented? Like, are we hoping that it manages to involve more kids with Latin? Is there not, I guess not we, but generally the community, is this hoping to present to like, to maybe make the game more accessible to certain orgs to be more willing to interact with the Certamen community? Like, I'm curious if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think for me, my primary goal right now is supporting Latin programs, keeping Latin in schools, supporting teachers and helping them market their programs, which hopefully means more kids are coming into Latin, more kids are involved. Because, I mean, to be honest, there are a lot of programs struggling right now. And part of that has to do with, not having enough people teaching Latin in some places. So, we also need to get people coming into the profession excited about the possibility of teaching Latin. And my hope is that maybe helping people to see how it's linked to all sorts of different disciplines is one way to generate excitement about it. I really appreciate you saying that about the fact that this isn't a big shift. It really is, and I hate like corporate words, but it really is kind of a rebranding for Latin programs, for us to say, hey, we're doing this thing that is so connected to all sorts of other disciplines, and also is so important. It's such an important outlet for kids to really build their excitement for studying Latin. And I know there are a lot of people who get into Certamen and then continue their association with Latin because of the great enthusiasm that's generated by Certamen. And so I want us to expand our ability to do that.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think this like kind of like introducing a more multidisciplinary ability to Latin by like trying to shift a focus to things outside of just the language, or not to say like the language is that small or anything. There's a lot, but
the language is great.
Yeah, but like introducing more topics to kind of potentially grab more people and increase just general overall enthusiasm is, I think, important for the game. So I'm really for that. It's like cool to hear it because it's the type of thing where you see the plans, you kind of vaguely like have to interpret, but it's nicer to kind of hear it in words. My final kind of question related to Steam is, so the NJCL obviously is very much, or not very much, but like is very focused, and that's clearly the view of like on local scenes and preserving them. So I guess the thing with Steam is like, again, it's not really a big shift. It's more like a question writing shift of some sorts. Is what's kind of the plan in terms of timeline for trying to incorporate this with more local scenes and classrooms so that they can kind of get to interact with it?
Yeah, so you mentioned these meetings that we're going to have over the next month or so. And so the hope is that there's through those discussions, we're going to get some clarity about which of those 5 proposed question distributions we're going to head in the direction of. And once we do that, I think we will work towards producing syllabi, materials, source lists that are going to help local students and teachers make whatever shift we decide to go with. But that's just going to take time. But luckily there are a lot of people with a lot of excitement and energy about Certamen. So I think we're going to be able to get it done, but I don't want to overpromise that lots of things will be ready, for instance, before this summer. But I also want to reassure people that we're not going to do something drastic. NJCL Certamen this summer is going to look like NJCL Certamen. And even, with these kind of proposed changes, I don't think we're going to see any drastic shift in NJCL Certamen. It's still going to be Certamen. We're just going to hopefully expand the things that we can talk about in some small ways, and also help us think about, how we're promoting ourselves. Let's get more people playing Certamen because they realize how connected Latin is to all of the various things that they're interested in the world.
Yeah, no. And I think like, some people are very doomsday, like, oh my God, they're going to switch everything. National is going to look so different. But I mean, it makes sense. That wouldn't be anything drastic. So I want to kind of now move to really talking about so again, just to reiterate, I've just been reelected. And you mentioned that you're working on the Quiz Wizards and potentially getting something in the works because I think y'all mentioned something on the Facebook about like signing up for pre-ordering and stuff. So if you'd be willing to talk about that and just kind of like, what can we sort of expect for these next 4 years of Certamen, and what's kind of like the overall thing would be cool to hear.
Yeah. All right. Well, when I said, if you had told me 4 or 5 years ago what I'd be doing, I might have said, I'm not sure. I never envisioned that I'd be talking with manufacturers about parts and supplies and the supply chain and how quickly we were going to get covers for machines and that kind of thing. But after, obviously when the pandemic was happening, we knew that that Creative Electronics was going to stop producing machines, but we had kind of some breathing space because we weren't sure how quickly we were going to get back to in-person play. And so we kind of gave them, I guess, about a year to, we helped them advertise, but to try to kind of let them find someone to hand things over to. And in that year, they didn't really feel like they had found the right person, but they were willing to hand the plans over to the American Classical League.
Okay.
So that NJCL would, in perpetuity, hopefully have the rights and access and that sort of thing. Which I just want to say that all of the gentlemen behind Creative Electronics have done nothing but support NJCL Certamen in every way that they can for years, since the 80s when, they started producing these machines. So I can't thank them enough for everything they've done. So they turned the plans over to us, and then we began working on manufacturers, that kind of thing. We have found a great, really enthusiastic, energetic person in your hometown, San Antonio, Texas, who has the expertise and is not only willing to manufacture machines, but he also has that same kind of ethos about wanting to support educational games, wanting to help the NJCL keep Certamen going, that kind of thing. And so I'm really excited. Hopefully by the time this podcast drops, we will have put pricing information out, because I have all the information I need from him for ACL to do the pricing, and we have a meeting Sunday night for us to set the price and then really start advertising and selling machines. So it's been a really long journey. A couple bumps along the way. Some of the gentlemen who used to manufacture the machines they're older, they've had some health issues. So there have been some delays in kind of getting the materials from them. And, I know everybody's like, what are they doing that's taking so long? But it really has been us pushing to get the materials in the hands of our new manufacturer, to investigate the parts that we need, because of course some things are readily available, other things we really needed to partner with the people who make parts. I mean, I can't even believe I'm talking about this, but but I'm excited that we're in the place that we are. I'm really excited that we're going to keep producing machines. Obviously the most important thing for us right now is just to get that going, because there's schools that haven't had a machine that worked for years. We're going to start offering repairs, all of those things to get that back up and running. But once we are manufacturing machines and kind of get a little bit ahead of our orders, we're also hoping to be able to offer machines that have a battery operated option, so that they won't have to plug in. And there also will be a conversion package that people can purchase for older machines to have the battery operated option. That's our next plan, our next hope. But first things first, we just have to start selling the old, machines. But I'm excited that like I said, I'm expecting that within another couple weeks that, we've got like the web pages ready. We've got the order, ready in the ACL store. So we just need to make it live. So I'm excited that we're to that point. So that's really something I never expected to do, but something I'm really glad to have been able to, hopefully start up production again. And then you asked about moving forward besides, producing Quiz Wizard 2 machines. My hope is that, and this has been in the works for a couple of years, but of course, I don't have to tell anybody that the pandemic has just thrown everything into disarray at times. But my hope is that we're going to be able to offer a syllabus that students and teachers can use to study along the way over the course of the year leading up to NJCL Certamen, and that in places where there's not a big local scene, that teachers can take that kind of pre-made NJCL syllabus and write their own questions for it, or that NJCL is going to be producing questions that can be purchased for local tournaments, and for, in order to kind of help get things going in places where there hasn't been a lot of Certamen before. We'll be able to offer that free for some places, and our hope is that also for Title I schools, that kind of thing, we can offer questions that'll work for this syllabus to hopefully get Certamen going in more places than it is now. But that's kind of what's next on the docket. And then I mentioned that having the ability to do online tournaments has really broadened Certamen, and I think eventually NJCL would like to get back to offering an online tournament sometime during the year.
Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation for another time, but that definitely is an interesting thing to hear about. And yeah, I mean, I think these are like very like logical next steps for NJCL, especially I think the like trying to, because I think y'all did write some question set in the past with a local project, but trying to get, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and we have been providing them for the last few years, but we're hoping that we're going to produce a syllabus that I guess is more applicable to more places.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
No, I think it does, because there's definitely like a disconnect of syllabi to some degree for different difficulty levels, and I think having like a one thing to follow would make life a lot easier. So yeah, that's just kind of like the future looking forward. This is kind of what we're hoping to see within the next couple of years within Certamen. And I guess that kind of brings us more or less to kind of the present day and kind of the conclusion of things. So I really want to just kind of, we've had a really long and nice conversation about a variety of things, whether things you've implemented, things you've experienced, and things you're hoping to implement. And I think, just as a teacher, though, obviously you can say whatever you would like, what's kind of your advice for other people about starting Latin programs and managing to like maintain them, because it's a tall task to do. So I'm just curious, like, what would you like to share about that, and like any other parting pieces of advice you have?
Well, teaching right now is a challenging job. And teaching Latin, I think, can be even more challenging. So I can understand how a teacher who hasn't experienced Certamen or JCL looks at it as kind of one more thing on top of everything else. But what I would like to say, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to say it, and what I like to do whenever I reach out to younger teachers is just to encourage them to start small when thinking about adding these things to a program, but know that Certamen and JCL activities and all of these things add so much excitement to your program that it makes it more sustainable for the long term. And so, in some ways it seems like additional work, but in other ways, the work that you're doing is one that's going to kind of help you keep your job in some ways, and help keep help your program grow and build so that you aren't worried so much about numbers and all of those things. The other thing that I would say to a young teacher is the only way to build a Latin program that has all these opportunities for students, which are wonderful, that build enthusiasm, that kind of thing. But the only way to really make it sustainable is to encourage student leadership. And I think you and other people I've known since they were in high school have done such a great job of, taking on the leadership of kind of helping programs continue, and helping teachers kind of keep making it happen for kids. And so, if you teach kids, if you first of all introduce kids to this and let them see how much fun it is, and then you teach them the things that they can do to help keep it going at your school, in your area, in your state, at the national level, whatever, then that's going to have a huge payoff in the end in terms of sustainability of programs. So, I would just emphasize, find little ways to start, and then give your kids, empower your students to help you keep it going, because they will. It's so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like hits I'm really bad with like expressions when I want to use them. The nail on the head. I think that's vaguely how that one works. Because yeah, I think student leadership's really important. It's probably kind of like a big driving force for a lot of programs. And I mean, I think without like, JCL, I don't know if I would have continued Latin for as long as I ended up doing it initially. Yeah. So it's great to hear that. It's great to hear the support for it.
Yeah, no, I was, we had, parents visiting our school today, and one of them was talking to my advanced kids, and they were like, so you don't have to take this class? And one of them, shout out to William Sykes, said, well, I never thought about not continuing to take Latin every year. And I told them, I said, like something like 90% of my kids continue all 4 years in Latin, not because they have to, but because it's so much fun. Why wouldn't you? So yeah, we've got to keep making that happen for kids.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And with that, I would like to say thank you so much for coming on to talk about so many things we got to talk about. I think it was a really productive conversation. So I really appreciate it. And for sharing such kind words. I think it's the type of thing that people need to hear and get that kind of encouragement to understand that there are people out there who are willing to help to make, JCL and just Latin in general keep on thriving. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about all of these things. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and take care.